convicted of a murder and receives a 38-year sentence. Convicted of a second murder and receives the death penalty. Then appeals the death penalty by claiming gender confusion. I am Bill Swafford, and it is time to look into all this here on Murderers in Ohio.
So we got a killer on a run in Ohio.
I come across an article, and the title of the article read, Inmate Appeals the Death Sentence Claiming Gender Confusion. So I read some more. 38-year-old Victoria Drain was appealing her death sentence, claiming that her defense lawyer did not bring up her gender confusion during the time that she committed a murder while being in prison, which led to her receiving the death sentence. Victoria hadn't always been Victoria. While appealing the death sentence, a legal name change was granted, and Joel Drain, a convicted murderer out of Hancock County, Ohio, became Victoria Drain. Joel Drain was not originally at the Warren Correctional Institution in Lebanon, Ohio, on death row. Joel was there for a murder that he committed in 2016. For that murder, he had received a 38-year sentence. While locked up in 2019, Joel commits a second murder, and that gives him the death penalty. Now you're going to hear me use the name Joel throughout this video, even though there was a name change. I chose to do that because these crimes that were committed were done under the name of Joel Drain, not Victoria. In May of 2016, the Sydney, Ohio Police Department received a phone call about a man by the name of Randy Grose being stabbed at his home. The caller was 34-year-old Joel Drain. Joel was brought in question and held on warrants from another case. The thing that gets me here, the report said that Joel called the Sydney, Ohio Police Department about a man named Randy Grose. Joel lived in Findlay, Ohio, which is 40 minutes north of Sydney. Now, the man that he called about, Randy Grose, also lived in Findlay, Ohio, which is in Hancock County. Randy Grose, at the age of 56, lived on Sherry Street there in Findlay, Ohio. Randy would be found at his home. Randy had been stabbed and strangled. The coroner report said that Randy had been stabbed multiple times in the head and stomach. However, the cause of death was strangulation. Joel Drain would be arrested and charged for the murder of Randy Grose. This happened on May 14th of 2016. Now here's a small twist in this. Randy wasn't the only person stabbed on May 14th. Joel had been at his dad's earlier that day. Joel had confronted his dad about sexual and physical abuse that apparently happened during his childhood. An argument broke out between Joel and his dad, and Joel stabbed his dad. Joel left his dad's house and then went over to Randy Grose's house. Joel told Randy about stabbing his dad. Randy and Joel had gotten in an argument. Joel thought that Randy would go to the cops and tell them what he had done to his own dad. That's when Joel attacked Randy and killed him. Joel left Randy's house by stealing Randy's car. So Joel was also charged with auto theft. Joel's dad did not die. Joel was charged for stabbing his dad and charged for the murder of Randy Grose. Joe would at first plead not guilty by the reason of insanity. He claimed that he was physically and sexually abused by his dad, and he also said that Randy Grose paid him money to have sex with him when Joe was a teenager. Joe would be found competent to stand trial. Joe would end up pleading guilty, and Joe received a 38-year sentence for the murder of Randy Grose. And then Joe received an additional 7 years for stabbing his dad. Joe could have possibly been released from prison when he was around 70 years old. The killer that's inside of Joe messed that up. Joe would serve some of his time at Warren Correctional Institution in Lebanon, Ohio, which is in Warren County. And in 2019, Joel Drain was transferred to the psych unit in the prison for a failed suicide attempt. In April of 2019, around 3 years after the murder of Randy Grose, Joel Drain would get the urge to kill again. Now at this time, Joel Drain was going through a little bit of a change. Joel wanted to start identifying as a woman. And also at this time, there still had been no legal name change. He was still considered Joel Drain. Joel admitted to the fact that he woke up one morning with murder on his mind. Joel had already been planning on murdering someone in the prison unit that he was in, someone that he thought was a child molester. However, Joel could not wait until he seen that person. Joel invited another inmate to his cell by the name of Christopher Richardson. Christopher was a known drug addict. Joel invited Christopher to the cell, saying that the two would smoke a K2 cigarette, which was fake marijuana. Joel actually figured that he could kill both Christopher Richardson and the person that he thought was a child molester in the same day. Joel took a fan and hit Christopher over the head with the fan. Then Joel took a pencil and stabbed Christopher in the eye. He took a cord and wrapped it around Christopher's neck and strangled him. Joel eventually let the cord go and Christopher dropped to the floor. Joel realized that he ended up using all of his weapons, and now he no longer had any weapons to kill the person that he thought was a child molester. And this angered him, so he started to kick and stomp Christopher Richardson while he was on the floor. 15 minutes later, Joel walked out of his cell alone. Joel's shirt was covered with blood, so Joel took a green hoodie and put that on to cover up the blood that was on his shirt. As Joel was walking through the unit, a prison guard noticed some blood on the stairwell. That guard followed the blood up to cell number 215, which was Joel Drain's cell. The cell door was shut, and there was something covering the window that way no one could see in. That guard called for backup, and when another guard showed up, those two guards opened up the cell door. That's when they found Christopher Richardson laying on the floor. His face was covered up with a sheet. Christopher was still alive, and they rushed him to the hospital. As the guards approached Joel Drain, Joel put his hands on his head and got down on his knees. He didn't put up a fight. Christopher died 3 days later in the hospital. Now, Joel was interviewed twice by a state trooper. Joel admitted to the fact that he had planned on killing someone else, the person that he thought was a child molester. However, Joel spent the morning in his cell getting himself pumped up to murder that child molester. He just couldn't wait any longer, and that is when he invited Christopher to his cell. Joel was found guilty for the murder of inmate Christopher Richardson and was sentenced to death by the state of Ohio. The courts believe that Joel showed no remorse for what he had done, and that if given a chance, Joel would kill again. Now, I believe that the courts might be right on this, because it is stated that when Joel was interviewed just a few hours after the murder, Joel had actually forgotten his victim's name. Here's something crazy. Before going to trial, Joel had actually written to a newspaper company and had written about what he had done and said that everything had been recorded and all this. And this was used against him at his trial. Joel did nothing to cover up what he had done. Joel, who now goes by the name of Victoria Drain, made the news here in 2022. Victoria claimed that her defense lawyer did not bring up the fact that she was dealing with gender confusion during the sentencing phase of her trial. Now, while Joe was appealing his death sentence, he did receive a legal name change to Victoria Drain. And I don't know how I actually feel about a convicted murderer getting a legal name change. Because if a legal murderer ever got paroled, shouldn't people know who that person is and what they've done? There is also an inmate who was willing to testify that Victoria tried to self-castrate herself in her cell. Now, I don't know how one would go about self-castrating themselves, and I don't think I really want to know. Victoria's appeal was voted on, and the courts voted on upholding the death sentence that was given. Apparently, gender confusion is not an excuse for murder. Joel Drain, who was given a 38-year sentence for murder, is now Victoria Drain, serving life on death row. Thank you for watching this video. Please make sure to check out Murderers on Ohio on Spotify, Google, Apple, or Iheartradio podcast. And also make sure that you hit that like button, that share button, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I am Bill Swafford, and this has been Murderers in Ohio.
We got the devil on the run in Ohio.